The sound was faint at first, a soft, rhythmic beeping, steady and unchanging. Then came the whispers, low voices speaking in hushed tones, words blurred together as if they were coming from a great distance. A dull ache throbbed in his head, a heaviness pressing down on his body like he was trapped under a weight he couldn't lift. Slowly, his fingers twitched. His breath felt shallow, strange, as if he had forgotten how to use his own lungs. His eyelids, heavy as stone, fluttered, slightly. The beeping grew louder, the murmurs more distinct. And then, with immense effort, his eyes opened. Bright white light stabbed through his vision, forcing him to blink rapidly. The ceiling above him was unfamiliar, stark, clinical, with a slow-moving fan spinning above his head. He inhaled sharply, his throat dry and scratchy, the air around him thick with the sterile scent of disinfectant. His mind felt foggy, sluggish, as if submerged in water. He tried to lift his hand, only to realize that there were tubes attached. To him, needles piercing his skin. Panic flickered inside him. Where was he? What had happened? Then, just as his breathing grew uneven, a voice broke through the haze. "You're awake." It was soft, hesitant, as though the speaker themselves couldn't believe what they were seeing. Slowly, he turned his head toward the sound. His gaze landed on a figure sitting beside his bed, their face partially hidden in the dim light of the room. The figure leaned forward, and as the details became clearer, a strange mix of emotions swirled inside him: confusion, disbelief, and something else he couldn't quite name. "How long?" he managed to rasp, his throat burning from disuse. Tears welled up in the eyes of the person before him. "Almost a year," they whispered. "A year." The words hit him like a blow, sending shockwaves through his already fragile mind. His thoughts scrambled to piece things together. The last thing he remembered was... what? A meeting. A drive. A flash of something too quick to grasp. Everything before this moment felt like a blur, just out of reach. His heart pounded in his chest as he forced out his next question, his voice barely above a whisper. "Who stayed?" For a moment, the person didn't answer. They just looked at him, their expression unreadable, their fingers gripping the edge of their seat as if gathering courage. Then, with a shaky breath, they finally spoke. "I did." And in that instant, as their words sank in, he realized the truth. The person sitting before him was the last person he ever expected. Silence filled the room, thick and heavy. The words echoed in his mind, repeating over and over. "I did." He blinked, staring at the person before him, trying to process what they had just said. His mind felt like a shattered mirror, broken pieces, scattered everywhere, making it impossible to see the full picture. A year. He had been unconscious for almost a year. And yet this person, this unexpected figure, had stayed. His throat was still dry, his voice weak, but he forced himself to speak. "Why?" The person hesitated, their hands, resting in their lap, clenched into fists. There was something in their expression, relief, exhaustion, and something deeper, something he couldn't quite name. "Because you had no one else," they finally said, their voice barely above a whisper. His chest tightened at those words. No one else? That couldn't be true. He was Rayan Kapoor, a millionaire, a man who had built his empire from the ground up. His life had been filled with people, friends, business partners, employees. His phone had never stopped ringing, his inbox always flooded with messages. He had been surrounded by admirers, colleagues, people who respected him, needed him. Hadn't he? His pulse quickened as fragments of memories surfaced. Lavish parties, grand meetings, the rush of making million-dollar deals. Faces blurred together, smiling, laughing, congratulating him. But now, as he lay in this stark hospital bed, none of them were here. Only this person. He swallowed hard. Who came to see me? A long pause. A hesitation that told him everything before they even spoke. No one. his breath caught in his throat. I tried calling people, they continued softly. At first, they came. For a few days, there were flowers, messages, a few concerned voices. But as time passed, they stopped. No more calls, no more visitors. Everyone moved on. Rayon's fingers clenched the thin hospital blanket. A cold realization washed over him. The people he had once believed would stand by him, the friends, the colleagues, the ones who had celebrated his successes, had all disappeared the moment he had fallen. And yet, this person, the one he least expected, had stayed. He looked at them again, searching their face, trying to understand. Memories of their past encounters surfaced, brief conversations, moments he had never paid much attention to. They had always been there, lingering in the background of his busy life, unnoticed, but present. And now they were the only one left. His chest ached, not from the coma, not from his weak body, but from something deeper, something raw. Why didn't you leave? He asked, his voice quieter now, almost afraid of the answer. A sad smile crossed their face. Because, Rayon, I wanted to see if you'd wake up, even if no one else did. The weight of those words settled over him like a heavy blanket, and, for the first time in his life, Rayon Kapoor felt truly alone and truly seen. Rayon lay still, his mind racing even as his body felt weak. The person before him had stayed, not out of obligation, not because they had anything to gain, but simply because they had cared. That realization settled deep inside him, heavier than anything he had ever felt before. He had spent his life chasing wealth, power, and influence, believing those things would bring him security. But now, lying in this hospital bed, he saw the truth with painful clarity. None of it had mattered in the end. The money, the status, the people who once filled his life, it had all disappeared the moment he became useless to them. A sharp breath escaped his lips. He didn't know whether to feel angry, disappointed, or just empty. The silence between them stretched, unspoken emotions swirling in the air. Then, for the first time, he truly looked at the person sitting beside him. He saw the exhaustion in their eyes, the faint lines of worry on their face, the way their hands trembled slightly as they rested on their lap. How did you manage? His voice was hoarse, barely a whisper. They exhaled softly, as if they had been holding in the weight of their own struggles. It wasn't easy, they admitted. There were days when the doctors said you might never wake up, days when I thought maybe I was holding on for nothing. But I couldn't walk away, Rayon. I just couldn't. Something inside him cracked at those words. He had always believed that loyalty was transactional, that people stayed as long as they benefited, but this person had proven him wrong. They had given him something that no amount of money could buy, genuine, unwavering care. His throat tightened. I don't deserve this, he muttered. They gave a small, tired smile. Maybe not, but sometimes life gives second chances to those who need them most. A lump formed in his throat. A second chance. Was that what this was? He had spent years building walls around himself, pushing away anything that wasn't directly tied to success. But now, stripped of everything, he realized how empty that success had been. The days that followed were slow, filled with painful recovery, but something inside Rayon had shifted. He no longer stared at his phone, waiting for messages that would never come. He no longer thought about the people who had abandoned him. Instead, he focused on the one person who had stayed. They helped him walk again, pushing him forward even when he wanted to give up. They sat by his side during long, quiet afternoons, sharing stories he had never cared to listen to before. And for the first time in his life, Rayon listened, not as a businessman, not as a man of power, but as someone who wanted to understand. Weeks later, when he finally stepped out of the hospital, the sun warming his skin for the first time in what felt like forever, he knew he wasn't the same man who had entered. He had woken up to a new reality, one where success wasn't measured by wealth, but by the people who truly stood by you when everything else fell apart. He turned to the person beside him, gratitude shining in his eyes. "I don't know how to repay you." They chuckled softly. "You don't have to. Just don't forget what this feels like." And he wouldn't. Because for the first time, Rayan Kapoor understood the value of something greater than money, genuine human connection. And he would spend the rest of his life making sure he never took it for granted again.